The blood-red sun was setting over the dusty horizon of Copper Creek when Katherine Taylor discovered the strongbox empty, and her husband of 7 years nowhere to be found. The last rays of daylight illuminated her trembling hands as she stared at the barren interior where their life-savings $5,000 meant to save their failing ranch had been only hours before. Katherine sank to her knees on the rough wooden floor of the bedroom she'd shared with James, the emptiness of the box reflecting the hollow feeling spreading through her chest. 7 years of marriage, 3 of them spent struggling to keep the ranch afloat during the relentless drought of 1875. And this was how he repaid her loyalty with betrayal and theft. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking in the silence of the empty house. "No, no, no." She had known things were difficult. The drought had devastated their cattle herd, cutting their income to almost nothing. The bank in town had given them one final extension on their loan, with payment due in full at the end of the month. Every penny they had managed to scrape together over the years had been placed in that box, their hope, their future, their salvation. And now it was gone. James was gone. Katherine tried to recall the last time she had seen him. That morning, he had kissed her cheek before she headed out to mend the fence on the north side of their property. His expression had been strange now. In retrospect, she recognized it as guilt. "I love you, Kat," he had said, lingering a moment longer than usual. "Remember that." The memory made bile rise in her throat. How could she have been so blind? With shaking legs, Katherine rose and moved to their wardrobe. She pulled open the doors to find half the contents missing: James's better shirts, his second pair of boots, his winter coat. He had planned this, probably for weeks. Outside, the last light faded, leaving her in darkness. Katherine didn't light a lamp. Instead, she sat on the edge of the bed, trying to make sense of how her life had shattered in an instant. At 32, she was alone, penniless, with a failing ranch and a bank debt she could never hope to repay. Morning came with cruel brightness, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the still air of the bedroom. Katherine hadn't slept. Her eyes were swollen and red, but no more tears would come. In their place was something harder, colder determination mixed with a deep, abiding anger. She dressed methodically, choosing her sturdiest work clothes. The ranch hands had already been let go weeks ago, another expense they could no longer afford. It was just her now, facing an impossible task. She would need to ride into town, speak to the banker, Mr. Hoffman, and try to explain. Perhaps he would grant another extension. The stable was quiet as she saddled her mare, Penny. The gentle horse seemed to sense her distress, nudging against Katherine's shoulder as she tightened the cinch. "At least you didn't abandon me," Katherine murmured, stroking Penny's chestnut neck. The 8-mile ride into Copper Creek gave Katherine time to think, to plan, to steel herself against what was to come. The small frontier town had grown substantially since she and James had first settled in the area. What had once been little more than a trading post was now a proper town, with a main street boasting a general store, a hotel, 2 saloons, a bank, and various other businesses catering to the growing population of ranchers, miners, and settlers. As Katherine rode down the main street, she felt the weight of curious eyes upon her. News traveled fast in small towns, and she wondered if people already knew of James's betrayal. Had anyone seen him leaving? Did they know where he had gone? She tied Penny to the hitching post outside the bank and smoothed her skirts, trying to compose herself. Inside, the cool interior was a welcome relief from the growing heat of the day. The teller, young Billy Porter, looked up with a smile that quickly faded when he saw her expression. "Mrs. Taylor," he said, his voice lowered. "Mr. Hoffman is expecting you." Katherine's heart sank. So, they knew already. Philip Hoffman was a stern man in his 50s, with silver hair and cold eyes that had never shown Katherine any warmth. As she entered his office, he didn't rise from behind his desk. "Mrs. Taylor," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. "I received an interesting visitor yesterday afternoon." Katherine sat, her back rigid. "My husband." "Indeed." Hoffman's fingers tapped a rhythm on his desktop. "He informed me that you would be selling the ranch, that arrangements had been made with a buyer from Austin, and that he was traveling ahead to finalize the details." The lie was so bold, so complete, that Katherine almost laughed. "That is not true, Mr. Hoffman. My husband has abandoned our ranch and stolen our savings. I discovered this only yesterday evening." Hoffman's expression didn't change. "I see. That is unfortunate. However, it does not change the fact that your payment is due in 3 weeks. $5,000, Mrs. Taylor, in full." "I need more time," Katherine said, hating the pleading note in her voice. "The drought will break eventually. I can rebuild." "Mrs. Taylor," Hoffman interrupted, "you have no ranch hands, a reduced herd, and now no capital. The Rocking Tea Ranch has been failing for years. This drought merely hastened the inevitable." 3 more months, Katherine persisted. "Just until autumn. I can find a way." "The matter is not negotiable." Hoffman's voice was final. 3 weeks, Mrs. Taylor. After that, the bank will be forced to foreclose." Katherine left the bank with her head held high, refusing to let the tears fall until she was safely on Penny, heading out of town. The situation seemed impossible. Without money or help, there was no way she could save the ranch. The drought had driven away most of the drifting cowboys who might have worked for room and board alone. Even if she could find help, what could she possibly do in 3 weeks to raise $5,000? When she returned to the ranch, the silence of the house was oppressive. She moved through the rooms like a ghost, touching the furniture, the curtains she had sewn, the photographs on the mantelpiece. One showed her and James on their wedding day in 1868, both of them young and smiling, full of hope for their future together. Katherine took the frame and hurled it against the wall, the glass shattering in a satisfying explosion of sound. It didn't help. Not really, but it was better than the silence. The following days passed in a blur of exhaustion and desperation. Katherine tried to maintain the ranch alone, rising before dawn to feed the remaining cattle, repair fences, and tend to the endless tasks that had once been shared among several people. By nightfall, she would collapse into bed, her body aching, only to rise and do it all again the next day. A week after James's disappearance, Katherine rode into town again, this time to post notices seeking ranch hands who would work for a share of future profits. It was a desperate gamble, but she had nothing left to lose. As she pinned the notice to the community board outside the general store, a shadow fell across the paper. She turned to find Sheriff Collins standing behind her, his weathered face creased with concern. "Mrs. Taylor," he said, tipping his hat. "Got a minute to talk?" Katherine nodded, following him to his office across the street. Inside, the sheriff offered her a seat and a cup of coffee, which she accepted gratefully. "I've been making some inquiries about your husband," he said, settling behind his desk. "Sent telegrams to neighboring towns, asking if anyone's seen him." Hope flickered briefly in Katherine's chest. "And?" "Got a response from San Antonio. Seems a man fitting James's description boarded a train to New Orleans 3 days ago. Paid cash for a first-class ticket." The flicker died. New Orleans was a port city. By now, James could be on a ship to anywhere in the world. "He's really gone then," Katherine said, her voice hollow. "I'm afraid so, madam." "And without evidence that he stole from you specifically since it was joint property, there's not much I can do legally." Sheriff Collins looked genuinely regretful. "I'm sorry, Katherine." She nodded, setting down her half-empty coffee cup. "Thank you for trying, Sheriff." As she left the office, Katherine felt oddly calm. The confirmation of James's departure had severed the last thread of hope that this had all been some mistake, that he might return with an explanation. Now she knew for certain. She was on her own. That knowledge was strangely liberating. The ranch had been her dream, as much as James's, perhaps even more so. Her father had been a rancher in West Texas, and she had grown up loving the land, understanding its rhythms, respecting its harsh beauty. She would not give up without a fight. But as the second week without James drew to a close, reality set in. No one had responded to her notices. The drought continued unabated, the sky a relentless blue without a cloud in sight. The cattle were growing thinner, and despite her best efforts, Katherine couldn't maintain the property alone. On a particularly brutal afternoon, as the temperature soared past 100 degrees, Katherine was attempting to fix a broken pump at the main well when the wrench slipped, gashing her palm deeply. Blood welled immediately, dripping onto the dry earth. She sat back on her heels, pressing a handkerchief to the wound, and for the first time since James had left, she allowed herself to truly cry. Deep, wrenching sobs tore from her throat as she knelt in the dust, her injured hand throbbing in time with her breaking heart. She didn't hear the approach of hoofbeats until they were nearly upon her. Startled, Katherine looked up to see a rider approaching slowly from the main road. She hastily wiped her face and stood, keeping the bloodied handkerchief wrapped around her hand. The stranger rode a magnificent black stallion, the animal's coat gleaming despite the dust of the trail. The man himself was tall, with broad shoulders and a lean frame. His face was shadowed by the brim of his hat. But as he drew closer, Katherine could see he was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps in his mid-30s. A thick layer of trail dust covered his denim pants and faded blue shirt, and a revolver hung at his hip. "Madam," he called, reining his horse to a stop a respectful distance away. "Didn't mean to intrude. Saw the ranch house and thought I might ask for some water for my horse." Katherine straightened, conscious of her tear-stained face and disheveled appearance. "Of course," she said, her voice rougher than she intended. "There's a trough by the stable." The stranger dismounted with fluid grace, leading his horse toward the stable. As he passed Katherine, he paused, noticing her injured hand. "You're hurt," he said, his voice deep and tinged with concern. "It's nothing, just a cut." He frowned, reaching into his saddlebag and pulling out a clean bandana. "May I?" Too tired to argue, Katherine extended her hand. The stranger gently unwrapped the blood-soaked handkerchief and examined the wound. "This needs cleaning and proper bandaging," he said. "It could fester in this heat." He led her to the pump she had been attempting to fix, working the handle until clear water flowed. With careful motions, he washed the cut, then wrapped it firmly with his bandana. "Thank you," Katherine said, surprised by his gentleness. The stranger nodded, then turned his attention to the pump. "This what you were working on when you got hurt?" "Yes, it's been sticking." Without another word, he picked up the wrench she had dropped, examined the pump mechanism, and began making adjustments. Within minutes, the pump was working smoothly again. "There," he said, standing and wiping his hands on his pants. "Should hold for a while now." Katherine studied him more carefully. His face was tanned from long days in the sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes, suggesting he smiled often, though he wasn't smiling now. His eyes were a startling blue, clear and direct as they met hers. "I'm Katherine Taylor," she said. "This is the rocking tea." "Grant Rivers," he replied with a slight nod. "Passing through on my way to nowhere in particular." Katherine hesitated, then made a decision born of desperation. "Mr. Rivers, I don't suppose you're looking for work. I need help around the ranch, just for a few weeks." Grant seemed to consider this, looking around at the property with an assessing gaze. "Can't help but notice you seem to be running short-handed. Where's your crew?" "Gone," Katherine said simply. "The drought forced us to let them go." "And your husband?" The blunt question stung, but Katherine appreciated his directness. "Also gone, with all our money." Grant's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Anger, perhaps, or understanding. He was silent for a long moment, then said, "I can stay a few days, help you get things in order." "I can't pay you," Katherine admitted. "Not now. Maybe a share of—" "Don't worry about payment," he interrupted. "I've got my own reasons for wanting to keep moving, but I can spare some time." Relief washed over Katherine, so intense it made her dizzy. "Thank you. There's a bunkhouse around back for the hands. It's empty now, but there should be clean bedding in the chest." Grant nodded, leading his horse toward the stable. "I'll get settled, then see what needs doing before sundown." As he walked away, Katherine felt the first stirring of hope she'd experienced in weeks. One man couldn't save the ranch, especially not in the short time remaining before the bank's deadline, but at least she wasn't alone anymore. That evening, Katherine prepared a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and the last of the preserved peaches from the previous summer. She called Grant in from the bunkhouse, insisting he join her at the kitchen table rather than eat alone. "It's not much," she apologized, setting the food before him. "Supplies are running low." "It's a feast compared to trail rations," Grant said, waiting for her to sit before he began eating. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the simple act of sharing a meal with another person soothing Katherine's frayed nerves. When they had finished, Grant leaned back in his chair, studying her openly. "How long has your husband been gone?" he asked. 2 weeks, Katherine replied, her hands tightening around her coffee cup. "He took our savings, $5,000. Every penny we had. And the bank? Foreclosure in 1 week unless I can pay the full amount." Grant whistled low. "That's a tight spot." "It's an impossible spot," Katherine corrected, a bitter smile twisting her lips. "I've accepted that I'll lose the ranch. I just want to leave with dignity, with my affairs in order. What will you do after?" It was a question Katherine had been avoiding. "I don't know. Find work, I suppose. I can cook, clean, sew. There's always need for domestic help." The thought of working as a maid or cook after owning her own ranch was painful, but pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Grant's expression darkened. "You built this place. It's not right that you should lose it because of a faithless man." "Right has little to do with it," Katherine said, rising to clear the dishes. "But I appreciate your sentiment." Later that night, lying in bed, Katherine found herself thinking about the mysterious cowboy who had appeared so suddenly on her property. There was something compelling about Grant Rivers, a quiet strength, an air of capability that made her feel safer than she had in weeks. His offer to help, with no expectation of payment, was a rare kindness in a world that had recently shown her only cruelty. She tried not to place too much hope in his presence. He had said he could stay a few days, not long enough to make a real difference to the ranch's fate, but having someone to share the burden, even temporarily, was a gift she hadn't expected. The next morning, Katherine woke to the smell of coffee brewing. Confused, she dressed quickly and made her way to the kitchen to find Grant stoking the stove, a pot of oatmeal simmering. "Hope you don't mind," he said, glancing up as she entered. "Thought you could use the rest, so I started breakfast." "Thank you," Katherine said, genuinely touched by the gesture. It had been so long since anyone had done anything for her. "You didn't have to." "I know." He poured her a cup of coffee and handed it to her. "I've been thinking about your situation." Katherine sipped the coffee strong and hot, exactly as she liked it. "And $5,000 is a lot of money to raise in a week," he said, ladling oatmeal into 2 bowls. "But not impossible." Hope flickered again, unwanted and dangerous. "What do you mean?" Grant set the bowls on the table and sat across from her. "You've got cattle, right? How many head?" "Maybe 50 left. Half of what we had before the drought." "And how many were you planning to drive to market this fall?" Katherine considered the question. 20 maybe, the strongest ones. "But they're underweight now, worth half what they should be." Grant nodded, thinking. "What about other assets? Equipment? Furniture?" "Nothing worth much," Katherine said. "And selling the furniture won't help if I'm trying to keep the ranch." "True," Grant acknowledged. "What about neighbors? Anyone who might lend you money?" Katherine shook her head. "Everyone's suffering from the drought. Those who have money to spare wouldn't risk it on the rocking tea." They ate in silence for a few minutes, each lost in thought. Then Grant set down his spoon with a decisive gesture. "I need to ride into town today," he said. "Check on a few things. While I'm gone, make a list of everything you own that might be worth selling, no matter how small. We'll figure something out." His confidence was infectious, and Katherine found herself nodding. "All right. But Grant, don't get your hopes up too high. Some situations can't be fixed." His blue eyes met hers, steady and determined. "I've never believed that, Katherine. There's always a way if you're willing to look hard enough." After Grant rode out, Katherine spent the morning cataloging her possessions. It was a depressing exercise. The furniture was sturdy but worn, unlikely to fetch more than a few dollars. Her mother's silver tea service might bring $50 if she found the right buyer. James's pocket watch left behind in his haste to leave perhaps another 20. By noon, her list totaled less than $200 worth of items. Nowhere near enough to save the ranch, but perhaps enough to give her a fresh start elsewhere. She was in the stable, checking on the remaining livestock, when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Expecting Grant, she was surprised to see 3 riders coming up the drive. As they drew closer, Katherine recognized Owen Mitchell, owner of the neighboring Flying M Ranch, and 2 of his hands. Katherine stepped out of the stable to meet them, wary of Mitchell's intentions. He had made no secret of his desire to expand his holdings by acquiring the rocking T, offering James a price well below the ranch's value, even in drought conditions. "Mrs. Taylor," Mitchell called, reining his horse to a stop. A corpulent man in his 50s, his face was perpetually flushed beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "Thought I'd ride over and see how you're faring." "I'm managing, Mr. Mitchell," Katherine replied coolly. "Thank you for your concern." Mitchell dismounted, handing his reins to one of his men. "Word in town is that your husband's run off with your savings. Bank's foreclosing next week." News traveled fast in Copper Creek, too fast. "Is there something I can help you with, Mr. Mitchell? I'm rather busy today." "Just wanted to extend my offer again," he said, removing his hat in a gesture of false courtesy. "I'll buy the rocking tee, $3,000, cash. You can be on your way before the bank takes everything." "The ranch is worth at least twice that," Katherine said, anger rising in her throat. "Even now," Mitchell shrugged, placing his hat back on his head. "Maybe before the drought. Maybe with a full herd and a working crew. But now, you're lucky I'm offering anything at all." "The answer is no, Mr. Mitchell. Same as it was when you made the offer to my husband." A sly smile spread across Mitchell's face. "Your husband didn't think my offer was so bad. In fact, we were in negotiations right before he left. I think he only ran because he knew I'd discovered the true state of your finances and was about to lower my offer." The revelation hit Katherine like a physical blow. Had James been planning to sell the ranch behind her back? Is that why he had taken the money, because negotiations with Mitchell had fallen through? "I don't believe you," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Believe what you want," Mitchell said, remounting his horse. "But my offer stands until the day before foreclosure. After that, I'll negotiate with the bank directly and likely pay even less." As Mitchell and his men rode away, Katherine leaned against the stable door, her mind racing. If Mitchell was telling the truth, James's betrayal was even deeper than she had imagined. The ranch had been her dream, as much as his more so, really. For him to negotiate its sale in secret was unforgivable. Grant returned late in the afternoon, his expression grim as he dismounted in the yard. Katherine, who had been waiting anxiously for his return, hurried to meet him. "What's wrong?" she asked, noting the tension in his shoulders. Grant secured his horse before answering. "I spoke with the banker, Hoffman. He's not willing to extend your deadline, no matter what." "That's not surprising," Katherine said, disappointed but not shocked. "There's more," Grant continued, his voice lowering. "Hoffman has already promised Mitchell that he can buy the ranch after foreclosure. They have some kind of arrangement. Mitchell gets the land at a discount, and Hoffman receives a private commission on top of the bank's fee." Anger flashed through Katherine. "That's corrupt!" "It's business as usual in towns like this," Grant said with a shrug. "The powerful protect each other's interests." They walked toward the house, both lost in thought. At the porch steps, Grant paused, turning to face Katherine directly. "I did find one piece of potentially good news," he said. "There's talk of a cattle buyer from Chicago arriving in San Antonio next week. He's looking for stock to ship north, paying premium prices even for underweight cattle." Hope surged again. "How premium?" "Enough that 50 head might get you close to what you need," Grant said. "But there's a catch. You'd have to get your cattle to San Antonio by next Friday, the day before your payment is due." Katherine's mind raced, calculating distances and logistics. "San Antonio is over 100 miles from here. We'd need to leave immediately, drive the cattle hard, and still might not make it in time." "It's a risk," Grant agreed, "but it might be your only chance to save the ranch." Katherine looked out over her land, taking in the familiar vista of rolling hills stretching toward the horizon. This place was her home, her future. The thought of losing it was unbearable. "We'd need more help," she said slowly. "Two people can't drive 50 head of cattle that distance." Grant nodded. "I know a few men in town, good cowboys down on their luck because of the drought. They might be willing to work for a share of the profits." "If there are any profits," Katherine cautioned. "There will be," Grant said with quiet confidence, "if we make it to San Antonio in time." The decision hung in the air between them, momentous and frightening. It was a desperate gamble with terrible odds. If they failed, Katherine would lose everything: the ranch, the cattle, and what little money she had left to start over elsewhere. But if they succeeded, "All right," she said finally. "We'll do it. We leave tomorrow at first light." Grant's smile transformed his face, lighting his blue eyes with approval. "That's the spirit. I'll ride back to town now, round up some men. We'll be ready to move the herd by dawn." As he turned to remount his horse, Katherine caught his arm. "Why are you doing this, Grant? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." He looked down at her hand on his arm, then met her eyes directly. "Maybe I've seen too many good people lose everything to men who don't deserve what they have. Maybe I'm tired of riding away instead of standing to fight." His words resonated with something deep inside her, a kindred spirit recognizing its match. "Thank you," she said simply, releasing his arm. Grant nodded once, then swung up into his saddle. "Pack light. It's going to be a hard drive." As Katherine watched him ride toward town, a strange feeling settled in her chest. Part fear, part excitement, and something else she wasn't ready to name. For the first time since finding the empty strongbox, she felt truly alive again, filled with purpose and determination. Tomorrow they would begin a journey that could save everything or cost her what little she had left. Either way, there would be no turning back. Dawn broke with a promise of another scorching day as Katherine finished securing her meager possessions to her saddle. She had packed only the essentials: a change of clothes, her father's old revolver, a small pouch containing her mother's wedding ring, and the few coins she had left. The rest of her life, the furniture, the photographs, the memories built over 7 years she was leaving behind. If they succeeded in reaching San Antonio and selling the cattle, she would return. If not, these belongings would become the property of the bank, and then Mitchell. Grant had returned late the previous night with 4 men, all experienced cowboys desperate enough for work that they had agreed to his terms: food during the drive, and a small percentage of the proceeds if they successfully reached San Antonio in time. Now they gathered in the pre-dawn light, a ragtag crew of lean, weathered men with determined expressions. Grant made the introductions as they prepared to round up the cattle. "This is Bill Cooper," he said, indicating a grizzled older man with a white beard. "Best trail cook in 3 states and handy with a rope." Cooper tipped his hat to Katherine. "Madam." "Marcus Reeves," Grant continued, nodding toward a tall black man checking the cinch on his saddle. "Fought for the Union, been cowboying ever since." Reeves nodded respectfully. "Mrs. Taylor." "The Diaz brothers." "Carlos and Miguel," Grant finished, introducing 2 young Mexican men who looked barely into their 20s. "Don't let their age fool you. They've been working cattle since they could walk." The brothers tipped their hats in unison, offering shy smiles. "Thank you all for coming," Katherine said, meaning it deeply. "I know this is a risk with no guarantee of reward." "Mr. Rivers made a convincing case," Cooper said, his voice rough from years of trail dust. "Said you were a good woman being done wrong by fate and faithless men. That's enough reason for me." The others murmured agreement, and Katherine felt a surge of gratitude toward Grant. What had he said to inspire such loyalty from these strangers? Before she could dwell on it, Grant was calling orders, organizing their approach to gathering the scattered cattle. Katherine mounted Penny and rode to join them, determined to pull her weight in this venture. The morning passed in a blur of dust, bellowing cattle, and shouted instructions as they gathered the herd from the far reaches of the ranch. By noon, they had assembled 47 head, all that remained of the once proud rocking T herd. "It's not many," Katherine said worriedly as she and Grant surveyed the milling cattle. "Will it be enough?" "It'll have to be," Grant replied. "The price in San Antonio will be better than anything you could get locally. If the Chicago buyer is serious about premium prices, we might just make it." They paused only long enough for a quick meal before beginning the drive. Katherine took one last look at the ranch house as they moved out, the small white structure growing more distant with each step. The lump in her throat made it hard to swallow, but she forced herself to face forward. Looking back wouldn't help now. The first day on the trail was brutal. The summer heat bore down mercilessly, and the cattle, already weakened by drought, moved slowly despite the cowboys' urgings. By nightfall, they had covered only 12 miles, far less than the 20 Grant had hoped for. As they made camp that night, Katherine could sense the concern among the men, though none voiced it aloud. At this pace, they would never reach San Antonio in time. After a simple dinner of beans and cornbread, prepared by Cooper, Katherine found herself sitting beside Grant at the edge of camp, away from the others. "We're moving too slowly," she said quietly, getting straight to the point. Grant nodded, his profile illuminated by the distant campfire. "The cattle are weaker than I expected, and we're hitting rough terrain tomorrow. What do we do?" He was silent for a long moment, considering. "We push harder. Leave earlier, stop later. The cattle may lose more weight, but it's better than not making it at all." "Will the men agree?" "They knew the stakes when they signed on," Grant said, "but I'll talk to them, make sure they understand how important this is." Katherine studied him in the dim light, this man who had appeared so suddenly in her life and taken up her cause with such determination. "Why did you really stay to help me, Grant?" "The truth?" He looked at her then, his blue eyes reflecting the distant firelight. "The first time I saw you, you were bleeding and crying, but still trying to fix that damn pump. Most people would have given up by then, with everything you'd been through, but not you." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've spent most of my life drifting, never staying in one place long enough to put down roots. But I've learned to recognize quality when I see it. You have more courage and determination than most men I've known. That's worth fighting for." His honest answer touched Katherine deeply, stirring feelings she had thought dead after James's betrayal. "Thank you for saying that." "Just speaking the truth," Grant said, rising to his feet and offering her his hand. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be harder than today." Katherine took his hand, feeling its strength and warmth as he pulled her up. For a brief moment, they stood close, their eyes locked in the darkness. Then Grant released her hand and stepped back. "Good night, Katherine," he said softly. "Good night, Grant." As predicted, the next day proved even more challenging. They pushed the cattle hard, starting before dawn and continuing until well after sunset. The terrain grew rougher, with rocky hills that slowed their progress further. By the evening of the third day, tempers were fraying. One of the Diaz brothers had been thrown from his horse when it stepped in a gopher hole, spraining his wrist badly. The cattle were growing increasingly difficult to manage, and they had lost two of the weaker animals to exhaustion. As Katherine helped Cooper prepare the evening meal, she overheard Marcus and Grant in heated conversation. "We're pushing too hard," Marcus was saying. "At this rate, we'll lose half the herd before we reach San Antonio." "We don't have a choice," Grant replied. "If we slow down, we miss the buyer and this whole venture fails. And if we keep this pace, the cattle will be too weak to fetch any decent price when we get there," Marcus argued. "You're asking the impossible." "I'm asking for one more day at this pace," Grant said firmly. "Then we reach the San Antonio River. The cattle can rest and drink there, and the going will be easier afterward." Katherine moved away, not wanting to eavesdrop further, but the exchange worried her. If even experienced cowboys thought the pace was too brutal, perhaps the entire plan was doomed. That night, sleep eluded her. She lay awake, listening to the sounds of the cattle and the occasional movement of the men on watch. When she finally drifted off near dawn, her dreams were troubled by images of the ranch slipping away from her, dissolving like mist in the morning sun. She woke to Grant gently shaking her shoulder. "Katherine, wake up." Disoriented, she sat up quickly. The camp was already stirring, men moving about in the pre-dawn light. "What is it? What's wrong?" "Riders approaching from the north," Grant said, his voice low. "Could be nothing, but I don't like it." Katherine scrambled to her feet, instantly alert. "Rustlers? Maybe, or could be Mitchell's men. Either way, we need to move the herd now." They broke camp with remarkable speed, the experienced cowboys sensing the urgency without needing explanations. Within 20 minutes, they had the cattle moving south again, away from the approaching riders. Grant rode beside Katherine at the rear of the herd, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon behind them. "6 riders," he said after a while. "Moving fast. They'll catch up to us before noon." "What do we do?" Katherine asked, fear curling in her stomach. "We keep moving," Grant said grimly, "and we prepare for trouble." By mid-morning, the riders were visible to everyone, 6 men pushing their horses hard to close the gap. Grant called Marcus and Cooper to join them at the rear while the Diaz brothers continued leading the herd. "I recognize 2 of those men," Cooper said, squinting at the distant figures. "They work for Mitchell." "What would Mitchell want with my cattle?" Katherine asked, confused. "He could buy better stock elsewhere." "It's not about the cattle," Grant said, his expression darkening. "It's about making sure you fail. If you don't make the payment, he gets your ranch at a fraction of its worth." The realization made Catherine's blood boil. "So he's sending men to stop us? That's criminal." "Welcome to the frontier," Cooper said dryly. "Law only matters when it serves the powerful." Grant checked his revolver, ensuring it was fully loaded. "Cooper, ride ahead and tell the Diaz brothers to keep the herd moving no matter what. Marcus, you and I will stay back and discourage our visitors." "And me?" Katherine asked, her hand moving to the revolver in her saddlebag. Grant's eyes met hers, stern but respectful. "Your choice. But if something happens to you, this whole venture is pointless." He was right, of course. This was her fight, but getting herself killed wouldn't help anyone. "I'll go ahead with Cooper, but I'll stay within sight. If you need help, I can shoot." Grant nodded, accepting her decision. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." Katherine rode forward with Cooper, her heart pounding as she watched Grant and Marcus drop back to confront the approaching riders. When they were about 100 yards ahead, she reined Penny to a stop, determined to witness what happened. Mitchell's men slowed as they approached Grant and Marcus, spreading out in a line that blocked the trail. Even at a distance, Katherine could see the confrontational posture of the lead rider. Though she couldn't hear the exchange, she saw Grant gesture several times toward the herd, his stance unyielding. The lead rider shook his head, and one of the others moved his hand toward his gun. In a flash, Grant's revolver was out and aimed, freezing the man mid-motion. Even from a distance, Katherine could see the shock on the riders' faces at Grant's speed. More words were exchanged, and then, to Katherine's relief, Mitchell's men began to back their horses away. It seemed Grant had convinced them that whatever Mitchell was paying wasn't worth the risk. As the riders retreated, Grant and Marcus returned to the herd. Katherine rode to meet them, her face questioning. "They won't be bothering us again," Grant said with grim satisfaction. "I convinced them that Mitchell wouldn't be able to pay them if they were dead." "You bluffed them," Katherine said, impressed. "Not entirely," Grant replied, his blue eyes cold. "I would have shot anyone who tried to stop us." The matter-of-fact statement should have disturbed Katherine, but instead, she felt a wave of gratitude. Grant was willing to fight, perhaps even kill, to protect her chance at saving the ranch. It had been a long time since anyone had been willing to stand up for her that way. "Thank you," she said simply. Grant nodded once, then turned his attention back to the cattle. "We need to make up for lost time. The San Antonio River is still a hard day's ride away." They pushed the cattle relentlessly through the remainder of the day, stopping only when darkness made further progress impossible. The herd was showing increasing signs of fatigue, with more animals struggling to keep pace. That night, as they sat around the campfire, the mood was subdued. They had covered less ground than hoped, and the confrontation with Mitchell's men had left everyone on edge. "We're still 5 days from San Antonio at this pace," Cooper said, voicing what everyone was thinking. "The buyer will be gone by then." "What if we split the herd?" Marcus suggested. "Take the strongest 30 head and push ahead. Leave the rest to follow more slowly." Grant considered this, looking to Katherine for her opinion. "It would mean dividing our forces. You'd have to go with the lead group." "And abandon the rest of my cattle?" Katherine shook her head. "Those animals represent everything I have left." "Not everything," Grant said quietly. "You still have the ranch if we make it to San Antonio in time." The decision weighed heavily on Katherine. Each animal was valuable, both financially and as a symbol of what she and James had built together. But Grant was right. The ranch itself was the true prize. "How many men would stay with the slower group?" she asked finally. "I'd stay," Cooper volunteered. "And one of the Diaz brothers. We could bring them along safely, just not as quickly." Katherine took a deep breath, then nodded. "All right. We'll split the herd tomorrow. The 30 strongest go ahead with Grant, Marcus, and me. Cooper and Miguel bring the rest at a safer pace." The decision made, they settled into an uneasy sleep, each aware of the increasing stakes of their journey. Katherine found herself lying awake again, staring at the stars and wondering if she was making the right choice. A shadow fell across her bedroll, and she looked up to find Grant standing nearby. Without a word, he sat beside her, his presence oddly comforting in the darkness. "Second thoughts?" he asked softly. "Many," Katherine admitted. "But what choice do we have?" "There are always choices," Grant said. "Just rarely good ones." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the sounds of the sleeping camp and restless cattle creating a backdrop to their thoughts. "Tell me about your husband," Grant said eventually. "What kind of man leaves his wife and steals her future?" The question hurt, but Katherine found herself wanting to answer. "James wasn't always like that. When we married, he was kind, ambitious. We had the same dream to build a ranch that would last generations." "What changed?" Katherine sighed, looking up at the vast expanse of stars. "The drought changed him. Each day watching the cattle grow thinner, the land drier, it wore him down. He started drinking, then gambling, trying to find an easy solution." She paused, the memories painful, but less raw than they had been. "I think he convinced himself that taking the money was the only way out, that somehow it was justified." "There's no justification for betrayal," Grant said, his voice hardening, "especially not of someone like you." The compliment warmed her unexpectedly. "You hardly know me, Grant Rivers?" He turned to look at her, his face half hidden in shadow. "I know enough. I know you're fighting with everything you have to save your home. I know you treat your men fairly and your animals with respect. I know you're stronger than most men I've ridden with." His words touched something deep inside Katherine, a part of her that had been wounded by James's abandonment, her sense of worth, of being valuable to someone. "What about you?" she asked, deflecting from her own emotions. "What's your story? Why were you passing through on your way to nowhere in particular?" Grant was quiet for so long that Katherine thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and reflective. "I was a ranger for a time, after the war. Saw things, did things that make it hard to settle in one place. Folks hear you were a ranger, they expect certain things from you, and sometimes they fear certain things about you. So you keep moving," Katherine said, understanding. "It's simpler that way," Grant agreed. "No expectations, no disappointments, just the horizon and whatever lies beyond it." "Sounds lonely." Grant looked at her with surprising intensity. "It is, but it's safer than the alternative." The vulnerability in his admission created a connection between them, a recognition of shared pain despite their different paths. Katherine found herself wanting to reach out, to touch his hand in comfort, but hesitated, uncertain of the boundaries between them. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Then Grant stood, breaking the tension. "We should both get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow will test us all." Katherine nodded, watching as he walked back to his own bedroll on the other side of the camp. Sleep came easier after their conversation, as if sharing her burdens had lightened them somewhat. At dawn, they began the process of separating the cattle, selecting the 30 strongest animals for the accelerated drive to San Antonio. It was painstaking work, made more difficult by the cattle's natural resistance to being divided. By mid-morning, they had successfully split the herd. Katherine stood with Cooper and Miguel, giving final instructions for the slower group. "Follow the same trail," she said. "We'll leave signs at any forks or crossings. With luck, you'll reach San Antonio only a day or two after us." Cooper nodded, his weathered face solemn. "We'll take good care of them, Mrs. Taylor. Don't you worry about this end of things." Katherine impulsively hugged the old cowboy, surprising them both. "Thank you, Cooper, for everything." With final farewells exchanged, Katherine mounted Penny and joined Grant, Marcus, and Carlos at the head of the smaller herd. A sense of renewed determination filled her as they set off at a brisk pace. They had shed the weakest animals and were traveling lighter. Perhaps now they could make up the time they had lost. The day passed in a blur of dust and movement. The reduced size of the herd made it more manageable, allowing them to maintain a steady pace even through difficult terrain. By nightfall, they had covered an impressive 20 miles, bringing them within sight of the San Antonio River. As they made camp, the mood was cautiously optimistic. The cattle were exhausted but still on their feet, and the promise of water the next day would revive them. "If we can maintain this pace," Marcus said as they ate a simple supper, "we might reach San Antonio by Wednesday evening. That would give us Thursday to find the buyer, make the sale, and get the bank draft to you before you have to ride back to Copper Creek." "It's still going to be close," Grant cautioned, "and we can't count on everything going smoothly." Katherine nodded, too tired to worry further. The physical demands of the cattle drive had left her exhausted, every muscle aching from long hours in the saddle, but underlying the fatigue was a core of fierce determination. They were going to make it. They had to. The next day brought the blessed relief of the San Antonio River. The cattle, smelling water, moved with renewed energy, breaking into a near run as they approached the banks. Katherine watched with satisfaction as they drank deeply, their ribs less prominent than she had feared. "They look better than I expected," Marcus commented, riding up beside her. "Chicago buyers can be particular, but these should fetch a decent price." "Enough to save the ranch?" Katherine asked. Marcus shrugged. "That depends on the buyer and your powers of persuasion. But cattle prices are high right now, with the railroads expanding north. You might just make it." They allowed the cattle and horses to rest for 2 hours before resuming the drive. The animals moved more willingly now, refreshed by water and the easier terrain along the riverbank. That night, as they camped beside the river, Katherine found herself sitting with Grant again, away from the others. The past days of shared hardship had created a comfortable familiarity between them, a sense of partnership that went beyond their initial arrangement. "We might actually succeed," Katherine said, watching the reflection of the moon on the river's surface. "Was there ever any doubt?" Grant replied with a hint of a smile. Katherine laughed softly. "Only every hour of every day since we started." Grant's expression grew more serious. "What will you do after?" "When the ranch is secure?" It was a question Katherine had avoided thinking about. "Go back, rebuild, find a way to make the Rocking Tea thrive again, even if I have to do it alone." "Alone," Grant repeated, the word hanging between them. "Is that what you want?" Katherine looked at him directly, seeing the question behind his question. "I thought it was. After James left, I couldn't imagine trusting anyone again, relying on anyone. And now?" Her heart beat faster as she considered her answer. Over the past days, Grant had shown himself to be everything James was not: reliable, honest, courageous. She had begun to care for him in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. "Now I'm not so sure," she admitted softly. Grant's hand found hers in the darkness, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "When this is over, when your ranch is safe, would you consider letting me stay? Not as a hired hand, but as something else." The question took her breath away. "Grant, you hardly know me." "I know enough," he said, echoing his words from nights before. "I've spent my life running from connections, from putting down roots. But something about you, about the way you fight for what matters, it makes me want to stop running." Katherine looked down at their joined hands, emotion tightening her throat. It was too soon, too fast, and yet it felt right in a way that defied explanation. "I can't promise anything," she said finally. "Not yet, but when this is over, when we've saved the ranch, ask me again." Grant's smile was answer enough, a rare, full expression that transformed his face. He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "I'll hold you to that, Katherine Taylor." The moment was interrupted by Marcus approaching, with news about the trail ahead, but the connection between them remained, a subtle current underlying their interactions as they continued the journey. The following 2 days passed in a grueling rhythm of early starts, long hours in the saddle, and brief rests. The cattle, sensing the end of their journey, moved with increasing reluctance, requiring constant attention to keep them moving. By Wednesday afternoon, as promised, the outskirts of San Antonio came into view. The city had grown substantially since Katherine had last visited several years earlier, with new buildings and businesses extending its boundaries in all directions. They drove the cattle to a holding pen on the edge of town that Marcus knew of, arranging for water and feed at a price that made Katherine wince. But there was no choice. The animals needed to look their best for the buyer tomorrow. "I'll go into town," Marcus volunteered, "find out where this Chicago buyer is staying, and make arrangements for him to see our cattle first thing tomorrow." "I'll come with you," Grant said. "Katherine, you and Carlos stay with the herd. We'll be back by nightfall." Katherine nodded, too tired to argue. As the men rode toward the center of town, she and Carlos settled in to guard the cattle, taking turns watching while the other rested. Despite her exhaustion, Katherine found it difficult to sleep. They had made it to San Antonio in time, but the most crucial part of their plans still lay ahead, convincing the buyer to pay enough for their cattle to save the ranch. Grant and Marcus returned after dark, their expressions encouraging. "The buyer is a man named Harrington," Grant reported as they shared a meal of stew purchased from a nearby boarding house. "He's staying at the Grand Hotel and has agreed to meet us at the Pens at 9 tomorrow morning." "Is he really paying premium prices?" Katherine asked anxiously. Marcus nodded. "From what I heard in town, he's already bought 3 herds at good prices. The railroad is expanding and Chicago needs beef. It's good timing for us." "And bad timing for Mitchell," Grant added with satisfaction. "His plan to sabotage your drive failed. And now he's going to lose the ranch he thought was in his pocket." The mention of Mitchell reminded Katherine of the larger stakes. "We need to complete the sale and get the bank draft tomorrow. I'll have to leave immediately afterward to make it back to Copper Creek before the deadline on Friday." "I'll ride with you," Grant said, his tone making it clear this wasn't negotiable. "Marcus and Carlos can wait for Cooper and the rest of the herd, then bring them along later." With the plan settled, they tried to get some sleep, though Katherine found herself tossing restlessly, her mind racing with all that could still go wrong. Morning brought clear skies and a sense of nervous anticipation. Katherine dressed in her cleanest remaining clothes, knowing that appearances mattered in business dealings. She braided her hair neatly and pinned it up, trying to look as professional and composed as possible despite days on the trail. Promptly at 9, a well-dressed man arrived at the Pens, accompanied by a younger man carrying a ledger. Edward Harrington was in his 50s, with a neat beard and shrewd eyes that assessed the cattle with expert precision. "Mrs. Taylor," he said, tipping his hat as Grant made the introductions. "I understand these cattle have come quite a distance." "From Copper Creek," Katherine confirmed. "Over 100 miles in 7 days." Harrington raised his eyebrows, impressed. "That's quite a drive, especially in this heat. They look to be in fair condition considering." "They're strong stock," Katherine said with pride, "drought-resistant. They'll fatten up quickly with proper feed." Harrington walked among the cattle, examining them closely, occasionally making notes that his assistant recorded in the ledger. The inspection seemed to last forever, each minute increasing Katherine's anxiety. Finally, Harrington returned to where she stood, with Grant and Marcus. "I'll be honest, Mrs. Taylor, these cattle are underweight and stressed from the drive. In normal circumstances, I wouldn't offer top dollar." Katherine's heart sank, but she kept her expression neutral. "But these aren't normal circumstances, Mr. Harrington, for either of us." The buyer smiled slightly, acknowledging her point. "Indeed, I need cattle, and the trains north won't wait, so I'm prepared to make you an offer." He named a figure that made Marcus whistle softly beside her. It was good better than Katherine had dared hope, but still short of the $5,000 she needed to save the ranch. "Mr. Harrington," Katherine said, gathering her courage, "I appreciate your offer, but I need to be candid with you. I need $5,000 to save my ranch from foreclosure. Every one of these cattle represents years of work and sacrifice." She gestured to the herd. "These may not be the fattest cattle you'll buy this year, but they're Texas Longhorns with good bloodlines. They've survived drought conditions that killed weaker stock, and more importantly, they're part of a ranch that I refuse to lose without a fight." Harrington studied her with new interest, his expression thoughtful. "You're asking me to pay above market value based on sentiment?" "I'm asking you to invest in the future," Katherine corrected. "Save my ranch now, and I'll give you first option on my cattle for the next 5 years at a fair price. You'll have a reliable supplier in Texas, and I'll have a reliable buyer in Chicago." Grant stepped forward, lending his support. "Mrs. Taylor is being modest. The Rocking T has some of the best grazing land in the region. When the drought breaks, which it will, her herd will thrive. This is an investment in future business, not charity." Harrington looked between them, then at the cattle again. Katherine held her breath, as aware that her entire future hung on this man's decision. $5,000, Harrington said finally, "for the cattle and the arrangement you described. First option on your stock for 5 years. Relief flooded through Katherine so intensely that she felt lightheaded. "Thank you, Mr. Harrington. You won't regret this." "I rarely regret business decisions, Mrs. Taylor," he replied with a slight smile. "My assistant will draw up the agreement and provide you with a bank draft. Shall we say noon?" "Noon is perfect," Katherine agreed, hardly believing their success. As Harrington and his assistant departed, Katherine turned to Grant, unable to contain her joy. Without thinking, she threw her arms around him in an exuberant embrace. "We did it!" she exclaimed, laughing as he lifted her off her feet and spun her around once. "You did it," Grant corrected, setting her down but keeping his arms around her waist. "That was some negotiating, Mrs. Taylor." Katherine became suddenly aware of their closeness, of the warmth of his hands through the fabric of her shirt, of Marcus and Carlos watching with knowing smiles. She stepped back, flustered but still smiling. "We all did it," she said, including the others in her gaze. "I couldn't have made this drive without each of you." "Well," Marcus said, "I think this calls for a celebration. Carlos and I will watch the herd. Why don't you two go find a decent meal in town before you have to ride back to Copper Creek?" The suggestion was clearly meant to give them time alone, and Katherine found herself both grateful and nervous at the prospect. But Grant was already offering his arm with a smile she couldn't resist. "What do you say, Katherine? One proper meal before we hit the trail again?" She took his arm, feeling a flutter of anticipation. "I'd like that very much." They found a small restaurant near the center of town that offered clean tables and home-cooked food, a luxury after days of trail rations. As they waited for their meal, Katherine found herself studying Grant openly, seeing him properly for the first time, away from the trail and its constant demands. He was handsome in a rugged way, with lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and hardship. His hands resting on the table were strong and capable, yet they had shown such gentleness when tending her injured palm that first day. "What are you thinking?" Grant asked, catching her gaze. Katherine smiled, unembarrassed at being caught staring. "I'm thinking that 2 weeks ago, I didn't know you existed. And now I can't imagine what would have happened if you hadn't ridden up to my ranch that day." "You'd have found another way," Grant said with certainty. "You're not the type to give up." "Maybe," Katherine acknowledged, "but I'm glad I didn't have to find out." Their food arrived beef stew with fresh bread, simple but delicious after days of trail cooking. They ate hungrily, the relief of their successful negotiation with Harrington allowing them to truly relax for the first time since beginning their journey. "When we get back to Copper Creek," Katherine said as they finished their meal, "I want you to know that you're welcome to stay. Not just as a ranch hand, but—" She trailed off, uncertain how to express what she was feeling. It was too soon for declarations of love. But there was something growing between them that deserved acknowledgement. Grant reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Remember what I said by the river? When this is over, when your ranch is safe, I'd ask to stay, not as a hired hand, but as something more." Katherine's heart beat faster as she met his gaze. "And I said to ask me again when it was over." A slow smile spread across Grant's face. "It's not quite over yet. We still have to get that bank draft to Copper Creek before the deadline." "Then let's not waste any more time," Katherine said, returning his smile. They collected the bank draft from Harrington at noon, the document representing Katherine's freedom and future, safely secured in an inner pocket of her jacket. After brief farewells to Marcus and Carlos, with promises to meet again in Copper Creek, Katherine and Grant began the long ride home. They pushed their horses as hard as they dared, covering nearly 30 miles before darkness forced them to make camp. As they sat beside their small fire, the vast Texas sky spread above them like a blanket of stars. Katherine felt a peace she hadn't experienced in months. "What will you do first?" Grant asked, poking at the fire with a stick. "When the ranch is secure?" Katherine considered the question. "Hire back some hands, rebuild the herd, make plans for surviving the next drought, because there will be one eventually." "Practical answers," Grant observed with a smile. "What did you expect?" "Nothing less," he admitted. "It's one of the things I admire about you. You see things as they are, not as you wish they were." Katherine leaned back on her elbows, looking up at the stars. "I wasn't always that way. When James and I first married, I was full of romantic notions about ranch life. Reality has a way of changing your perspective." "Not all romance is illusion," Grant said quietly. Katherine turned to look at him, finding his eyes already on her, warm with an emotion that made her breath catch. "No," she agreed softly. "Not all of it." The moment stretched between them, filled with possibility. Then Grant moved, closing the distance between them with deliberate slowness, giving her every chance to pull away if she wished. Katherine didn't move, her heart pounding as he gently cupped her face in his hands. When his lips met hers, the kiss was soft at first, a question rather than a demand. She answered by leaning into him, her hands finding their way to his shoulders, then the back of his neck. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness and recent weeks of fear dissolving in the warmth of their connection. When they finally parted, Katherine felt dizzy with emotion and the sheer rightness of being in Grant's arms. "I've been wanting to do that since the river," Grant admitted, his voice rough. "Only since then?" Katherine teased, surprising herself with her boldness. Grant laughed softly. "Maybe since I first saw you trying to fix that pump. You were the most beautiful, determined woman I'd ever seen, even with blood on your hands and tears on your face." His words touched her deeply, healing something that had been broken when James left. "I think I started falling for you when you faced down Mitchell's men. No one had ever fought for me like that before." They stayed close, talking softly under the stars, sharing pieces of their pasts and hopes for the future until sleep finally claimed them. For the first time since James's betrayal, Katherine fell asleep, feeling not just hopeful, but truly happy. The remaining journey to Copper Creek passed in a blur of hard riding and brief rests. By late Thursday afternoon, they were within 20 miles of town, pushing their tired horses as much as they dared. "We'll make it by morning," Grant assured her as they made their final camp. "Plenty of time before the bank closes." Katherine nodded, too exhausted to speak. The physical demands of the cattle drive, followed by the rushed return journey, had drained her completely. Only the precious bank draft in her pocket and Grant's steady presence kept her moving forward. They reached Copper Creek shortly after dawn on Friday, the final day before foreclosure. The small town was just coming to life, shopkeepers opening their doors, a few early risers moving along the boardwalks. Katherine's appearance drew curious stares. She knew she must look a sight dusty, disheveled, her clothes wrinkled from days on the trail. But none of that mattered now. All that mattered was getting to the bank before Hoffman could claim her ranch. They rode directly to the bank, arriving just as the clerk was unlocking the front door. The young man's eyes widened in surprise at the sight of Katherine dismounting stiffly from her horse. "Mrs. Taylor, we weren't expecting you." "I'm sure you weren't," Katherine replied dryly. "Is Mr. Hoffman in yet?" "No, madam. He usually arrives at 9. Katherine checked the clock visible through the bank window. 8:15. "Then I'll wait for him." Inside, she and Grant sat on the hard wooden bench near the teller's window, ignoring the curious glances from the clerk and the single customer who entered after them. Katherine's hand kept straying to her pocket, reassuring herself that the bank draft was still there, still real. At precisely 9 o'clock, Philip Hoffman walked through the bank's front door, stopping short when he saw Katherine. "Mrs. Taylor," he said, clearly surprised. "I didn't expect to see you again before tomorrow's foreclosure." Katherine rose, facing him with newfound confidence. "I've come to pay my loan in full, Mr. Hoffman." Disbelief flickered across the banker's face, quickly replaced by careful neutrality. "I see. Well, if you'll come into my office, we can discuss the matter." Katherine and Grant followed Hoffman into his private office, the same room where he had so coldly informed her of the impending foreclosure 3 weeks earlier. Now, as she took the seat across from his desk, Katherine felt none of the desperation or fear that had plagued her then. "I understand from Sheriff Collins that you've been on a cattle drive," Hoffman said, his tone conversational but his eyes shrewd. "Rather unusual for a woman alone." "I wasn't alone," Katherine replied, glancing at Grant. "And yes, we drove cattle to San Antonio to sell to a buyer from Chicago." Hoffman's gaze shifted to Grant, assessing him with open suspicion. "And you are?" "Grant Rivers," he replied simply. "I helped with the drive." "I see," Hoffman said, though his expression suggested he didn't see it all. "Well, Mrs. Taylor, about your loan—" $5,000, Katherine interrupted, withdrawing the bank draft from her pocket and placing it on his desk. "Paid in full, as agreed." Hoffman stared at the document, momentarily speechless. He picked it up, examining it closely as if hoping to find some flaw or forgery. Finding none, his expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "This appears to be in order," he admitted reluctantly. Though I must say, Mrs. Taylor, it's quite irregular. We had already begun processing the foreclosure. But it's not final until tomorrow, Katherine pointed out, and I'm paying in full with a valid bank draft before the deadline. There should be no irregularity at all. Hoffman's lips pressed into a thin line as he realized his carefully laid plans with Mitchell had been thwarted. No, I suppose not. Very well. I'll have the clerk prepare a receipt showing your loan is paid in full. He rose, taking the bank draft with him. Wait here. When the door closed behind him, Katherine let out a long breath, tension draining from her shoulders. We did it, she whispered. The ranch is safe. Grant took her hand, squeezing it gently. Never doubted it for a moment. Hoffman returned shortly with official documentation, confirming the loan's repayment and declaring the mortgage satisfied. Katherine read each document carefully before signing, unwilling to trust the banker after his obvious disappointment at her success. Is there anything else, Mr. Hoffman? She asked as she finished the final signature. No, Mrs. Taylor. Your business with the bank is concluded. His tone suggested he hoped never to see her again. A sentiment Katherine fully returned. As they left the bank, stepping into the bright morning sunlight, Katherine felt lighter than she had in months. The ranch was hers, free and clear. The future, which had seemed so bleak only weeks earlier, now stretched before her, filled with possibilities. Grant seemed to read her thoughts. What now? He asked as they untied their horses. Before Katherine could answer, a familiar voice called her name. She turned to see Sheriff Collins approaching, his expression a mix of surprise and pleasure. Mrs. Taylor, I heard rumors you were back in town, and with good news from the look on your face. The best news, Sheriff, Katherine confirmed. The loan is paid and the ranch is safe. Well, I'll be, Collins said, genuinely pleased. That's wonderful. And I have some news that might interest you as well. Oh? The sheriff's expression turned more serious. Got a telegram from New Orleans yesterday. Seems your husband was caught trying to book passage to South America. He was arrested for various frauds he'd committed in Louisiana some years back, under a different name. The news hit Katherine like a physical blow. James had been living under a false name when she met him. Had their entire marriage been built on lies? I didn't know, she managed to say. No reason you would, Collins said kindly. From what I can gather, he's been running from his past for years. Seems it finally caught up with him. Katherine nodded, processing this revelation. Strange as it seemed, the news brought her a sense of closure rather than fresh pain. James, or whatever his real name was, had never been the man she thought she married. The betrayal had begun long before he took the money and ran. Thank you for telling me, Sheriff, she said finally. But honestly, James's fate matters less to me now than it might have a few weeks ago. I've moved forward. Her eyes met Grant's as she spoke, and the warmth in his gaze confirmed that she wasn't alone in that movement. They bid farewell to the sheriff and rode slowly down the main street, both too tired for further conversation. As they passed the general store, the owner, Mrs. Perkins, hurried out to meet them. Katherine Taylor, as I live and breathe, we've all been wondering what became of you. Katherine smiled wearily at the older woman, who had always been kind to her. Hello, Mrs. Perkins. I've been on quite a journey, but I'm home now. And you've saved the ranch from what I hear, Mrs. Perkins said, her eyes bright with curiosity. The whole town's been talking about it, how you drove cattle to San Antonio all by yourself. Hardly by myself, Katherine corrected, nodding toward Grant. I had excellent help. Mrs. Perkins turned her attention to Grant, assessing him with the keen eye of a woman who had seen generations of cowboys come and go through Copper Creek. Whatever she saw apparently met with her approval, for she smiled warmly. Well, you both look dead on your feet. Come in, have some coffee and a proper meal before you head back to the ranch. The offer was too tempting to refuse. Inside the store, Mrs. Perkins settled them at the small table she kept for customers, bringing coffee and bowls of hearty stew from her own kitchen behind the store. As they ate, various townspeople found reasons to enter the store, each offering congratulations and asking for details of the cattle drive. Katherine was surprised by the genuine warmth of their reactions. She had always felt somewhat isolated from the town, especially after James began drinking. Seems you've become something of a local hero, Grant observed quietly after a particularly effusive rancher had left the store. Katherine shook her head, bemused. I just did what I had to do to save my home. That's what heroes do, Grant replied with a smile. The ordinary things that need doing, even when they seem impossible. Their eyes held for a long moment, the connection between them deepening with each shared experience. Katherine felt a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the coffee or stew. By the time they finally left town, the sun was high overhead. The 8-mile ride to the ranch seemed endless in their exhausted state, but as they crested the final hill and the rocking T came into view, Katherine felt a surge of emotion. The small white house, the barn, the corrals all appeared just as she had left them nearly 2 weeks earlier. But everything had changed. She had changed. They stabled the horses and entered the house, the familiar surroundings welcoming Katherine home. Strange to think that the last time she had been here, she had discovered James's betrayal and thought her world had ended. Now she saw the house with new eyes, not as the site of her greatest heartbreak, but as the foundation for her future. Grant stood in the doorway, watching her as she moved through the rooms, his presence solid and reassuring. When she returned to the main room, he was still there, waiting with a patience that spoke of his understanding of what this homecoming meant to her. It feels different, she said, trying to explain the strange sensation. Like I'm seeing everything for the first time. It is different, Grant replied. You're different. You fought for this place and won. It's truly yours now, in a way it wasn't before. His insight struck Katherine deeply. He was right, she had claimed the ranch in a way that went beyond legal ownership. She had proven to herself and others that she could fight for what mattered to her and succeed against the odds. Exhaustion suddenly overwhelmed her, the physical and emotional toll of the past 2 weeks catching up all at once. Grant noticed immediately, guiding her to a chair with gentle hands. You need rest, he said, his voice brooking no argument. Real rest in a real bed. Everything else can wait. Katherine was too tired to protest as he helped her to the bedroom. The sight of the bed, her bed was almost overwhelming after so many nights on the hard ground. She sat on the edge, looking up at Grant standing in the doorway. Thank you, she said, the words inadequate for all she felt. For everything. He smiled, his blue eyes warm with emotion. Get some sleep, Katherine. I'll be here when you wake up. The promise in his words followed her into dreams, bringing a peace she hadn't known in far too long. Katherine slept through the remainder of the day and the entire night, waking only when sunlight streamed through her bedroom window the following morning. For a moment, disoriented from her deep sleep, she wondered if the entire cattle drive had been a dream, if she would find the strong box still empty and foreclosure still looming. Then she saw the trail-worn clothes she had discarded before sleeping, and reality settled around her. It wasn't a dream. The ranch was safe. And Grant. She rose quickly, washing her face and changing into clean clothes before making her way to the kitchen. There she found Grant at the stove, cooking eggs and bacon, looking as if he belonged there. He turned at her approach, a smile lighting his face. Good morning, or should I say afternoon. You slept for nearly 18 hours. I needed it, Katherine admitted, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. You look like you got some rest too. The bunkhouse bed felt like luxury after the trail, Grant agreed, and I had some thinking to do. Something in his tone made Katherine's heart beat faster. What kind of thinking? Grant served the eggs and bacon onto 2 plates, setting them on the table before answering. About the future, about what I said by the river, and again on the trail back. They sat across from each other, the simple breakfast between them, the moment laden with significance. When we were in San Antonio, Grant continued, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of emotion. You said I was welcome to stay, not just as a ranch hand but as something more. I've been thinking about what that might mean for both of us. Katherine set down her coffee cup, her hands suddenly unsteady. And what conclusion did you reach? That I want to stay, Grant said simply. Not for a week or a month, but for good. That I'm tired of drifting, of always moving on before connections can form. That meeting you has changed something fundamental in me. He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. I know it's fast. I know you've been hurt, and trust doesn't come easily after betrayal. But I'm not asking for promises you're not ready to make. I'm just asking for a chance to prove, day by day, that what's growing between us is real and lasting." Katherine looked at their joined hands, then up to meet his earnest gaze. The Grant Rivers sitting before her now was a far cry from the dusty, guarded stranger who had ridden onto her ranch just 2 weeks earlier. In that short time, he had shown her more loyalty, more genuine care than James had in years of marriage. "I'm still healing," she said honestly. "From James, from the betrayal, from everything that happened. I can't promise where this will lead or how quickly." "I'm not asking for promises," Grant repeated. "Just permission to stay, to help rebuild the ranch, to be part of your life in whatever way feels right to you." Katherine felt tears gathering in her eyes, but they were tears of relief and hope rather than sadness. "When you first arrived, you helped me without asking anything in return. You said, 'Don't worry about payment.' It was the kindest thing anyone had done for me in so long." She squeezed his hand, gathering courage for what she wanted to say. "You rode with me to San Antonio, faced down Mitchell's men, helped me save everything that matters to me. And through it all, you never asked for anything for yourself." "That's not entirely true," Grant said with a small smile. "I'm asking for something now." "You're asking for permission to give more of yourself," Katherine corrected gently. "That's different." She rose from her chair, still holding his hand, and moved around the table to stand beside him. "Yes, Grant Rivers, you have my permission to stay, to help rebuild the ranch, to be part of my life. And yes, I want to see where this leads us day by day, with no promises except honesty and respect." Grant stood, facing her with an expression of such hope and joy that it took her breath away. "I can work with that," he said softly before drawing her into his arms. This kiss was different from their first, less tentative, more a promise of things to come. Katherine leaned into it, into him, feeling for the first time that the future stretching before her was not just secure, but filled with possibility. When they finally parted, Grant kept his arms around her waist, as if unwilling to let her go, now that he had permission to hold her. "So, what's first on the list for rebuilding the rocking T, besides hiring back some hands and expanding the herd?" Katherine smiled, loving his practical approach to their future together. "First, we wait for Cooper and Miguel to arrive with the rest of the cattle. Then we start planning for when Marcus and Carlos return. We'll need to repair the north fence line, clear the irrigation ditches before the rains come, and take stock of our supplies for winter." "Sounds like a lot of work," Grant observed, but his tone was pleased rather than daunted. "Good thing you've got help now." "Very good thing," Katherine agreed, resting her head against his chest for a moment, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Outside, the sun shone on the drought-stricken land of the rocking T. But Katherine knew that drought always ended eventually, that rain would come again, bringing new life and growth. Just as Grant had come into her life when she most needed strength and hope, bringing the promise of a new beginning. James had vanished with their money, thinking he was taking her future with him, but he had been wrong. Her future was here, on this land, with this man who had walked into her life and said, in essence, "I'll stay with nothing," asking only for the chance to build something meaningful together. As they stood in the kitchen of the home she had fought so hard to save, Katherine felt a certainty deep in her soul. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, and that made all the difference in the world.